Yeah, it's interesting that because I've known this was coming up, and the questions that you sent through really got me thinking about how long I've actually been
Mm.
dealing with the tinnitus and how long I had consigned it to inevitable. So, even every day I kind of am consciously aware that mindfulness element to it has really kind of fundamentally changed everything. And it's encouraging me also to sort of look back on things as well. And so it's quite an interesting time in terms of coming to terms with the tinnitus, changing my relationship with it. Um, it's yeah, it's I don't quite know how to explain it. Actually, it's a strange feeling of kind of um handling it and almost moving on from it. It's a bit like, okay, dealt with that now. Dealt with that now. Got that. Next.
Absolutely. So you can kind of leave it in the past without it seeping through into your everyday life when you don't want it to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's and then when it does, when there are times when as I think you said a few weeks ago, when I'm tired, when I'm a bit stressed, when I'm a bit hungry, even, it's there, and I think when I became aware, there would be times where, when I became aware of it, that would be it for the night. Here it's here now. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. And now, I kind of sit there and oh, okay, yeah, here it is. Hello.
Absolutely. Different approach
Yeah.
when you notice it.
Am I going to do something about it, or am I just going to let it be? Um, and I think that the power of being able to say, I'm just going to let it be it's quite something. It's actually quite empowering because it feels as though it's no longer that I'm being dictated to by my tinnitus, but actually I'm choosing to give it a bit of space. Um, not that it's, and intellectually, I know it's always there. I know enough about the way it works now to know that it's not actually going to go away, but what I've got is that toolkit that we talked about that gives me that chance to decide how I'm going to play with it. Um, and actually, yeah, play with it a bit. It's been quite an interesting, very, very rapid journey in the end. And thinking back again, like with the way I handled the diabetes, an awful lot of exploration, and then actually, once I knew what I was doing, it's then it's easy. The other thing about that, actually, I've known about my tinnitus for longer than I've known about my diabetes. Thinking about it, um, I think I probably, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I was aware of a sound going back 20, 25 years. Um, the diabetes is I've only been diagnosed since 2011, so that's only 13 years. The diabetes is actually the new kid on the block.
Wow, I didn't say this. Are you able to say why there was such a different reaction to both conditions then?
Yeah. So I think probably my tinnitus it was just a noise. It was just something that every now and again I heard. I used to go to a lot of concerts. Um, those concerts would inevitably be very loud. I had no ear protection. it was almost as though it was just a consequence of attending the conference, and it came and went. I think with the diagnosis of diabetes, it it presented itself as something that had to be dealt with because of the potential complications of not doing anything about it. And I think that I learned quite an early lesson. No, it probably wasn't an early lesson because I wasn't young when I was diagnosed with diabetes. I think I learned at that point that I could do something. There was a choice. Either I do something about it or I don't. And I think historically I was probably quite good at denial. Yeah. And I'd always been quite lucky healthcare wise. I'd never had any significant episode, nothing particularly serious. And so I'd never had to deal with my own health and well-being because it was just there. And the diagnosis of diabetes was actually a kind of a wake-up call. And rather than going into denial mode, I decided I wanted to find out more and do something about it. I was supported in that by healthcare professionals who said, on the one hand, gave me quite confusing information. Oh, you're fine. You're not overweight. Your diet looks good. All the kind of reassurances which actually would have been better if those had been confronted as there's stuff you can do here, because I found that out, but I had to find it out over the longer term. But what they did do was put me on an education program, which was funded by the local health authority. So we're going back before all of the changes to healthcare. And that education program really sparked an interest in, okay, what can I do about this? Linking that to my tinnitus, I don't think I ever considered that it was that something that I would talk to a healthcare professional about, because it was just this noise that came and went. And actually, at one point, I did speak to my GP about it, and I did get referred to an audiologist, and I did have my hearing tested, and they did find that there was a weakness in the upper registers. And this was probably 15 years ago. And the conversation kind of went, you probably need to go and get this looked at in more, somebody else needs to have a look at this. You probably need long waiting lists. I did nothing about it because it came and went. And so I had a perfect structure with the diabetes for, okay, find out more about it, see what you can do, experiment, talk to specialists, extend your knowledge, make the decisions. It was only when my tinnitus, I felt, had got so bad that I couldn't cope with it that I started that process then. It wasn't that I was denying the fact that the tinnitus was there. It was more that I didn't see it as being anything that I could be helped with. When I did start to explore by looking at YouTube videos, by joining chats, what I heard was tinnitus is really, really difficult to do anything about because it's all in the head of the person who suffers from it. So there's no way. With diabetes, you can measure your blood sugar and you know whether or not that diabetes is controlled. With tinnitus, you can only talk to a healthcare professional about what you can hear. There's no, okay, there are surveys, there are assessments where you can evaluate it, but there's nothing that actually tells you whether it's just you making a mountain out of a molehill or whether it's actually something that you need to be able to do something about. And if you do want to do something about it, what is there that's available to you? Unless you connect with people who understand. But then I suppose there's a parallel with diabetes. If you speak to a GP in the UK about diabetes, if they happen to have a special interest in it, they may be able to give you more information because they're generalists. So why would they know anything more about tinnitus than they know about diabetes? It is, the reality. So the challenge then is finding the specialists who can actually help, who are then, as specialists, cognizant of what tinnitus is, what it means, how it comes about, and what options are available. And I think probably the longest part of the journey for me in terms of my tinnitus was understanding what's actually available and what can be done about it, rather than, okay, so you've got diabetes, here are some tablets you can take. They'll bring your blood sugars down. Oh, you've got tinnitus. Yeah. There's that kind of, yeah, sorry. And several healthcare professionals that I spoke to, both in the UK and in Italy, they would kind of say, yeah, really sorry, you've got tinnitus, nothing we can do about it. You're just going to have to learn to live with it. And I think that that's absolutely true. That's what you have to do, is learn to live with it. But being able to sort of offer that extra step of, and here are some approaches, here are some techniques you can try, here are some ideas, here are some people you can talk to. Here are some other tinnitus sufferers who can share their experiences with you. If that step isn't there, linking it back again to the diabetes, I get sent on a diabetes training program. Desmond, diabetes. I did, yeah. Anyway, did you? Diabetes, diabetic education and self-management for ongoing and newly diagnosed, Desmond, right? So you sit down with other people who have got diabetes and you talk to nurse practitioners who are experts in diabetes, and there's this kind of sharing of knowledge. What I found with tinnitus was you can go onto chat sites and you can listen um, to podcasts and webinars, but it's always individuals talking about their suffering rather than looking at what options are available. And I think the avenue I went down was that the options that seemed to be available were about masking tinnitus. What sounds can you listen to? And then I suppose I envisaged that the call was, do I want to spend the rest of my life with headphones on, or do I want to try and live as normal a life as possible? And so I think it took a while to get to the point where I recognized that there was help available, that there were things that I would be able to do about my tinnitus. There were coping strategies. There was technology available that would support. What happened was that I got to um, quite a depressed state before I was able to find it was a plea, a plea driven by suffering that actually got me to that point. Whereas with my diabetes, the diagnosis sparked the interest. So, and it was not wanting it to get any worse. Whereas with the tinnitus, I think it had got as bad as I felt it was ever going to get. And at that point, I thought, if I don't ask for some help here, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and the interaction that at no point with my tinnitus have I ever felt that any healthcare professional has been dismissive of it. I think people are quite sympathetic. Everybody I've ever spoken to about it, when I've said, I suffer from tinnitus, they've been really quite empathic and sympathetic. But it's taken a long time to actually get to the point where I found support and help.
Which is a shame, really, the fact that you felt that people were sympathetic, they heard you, but that wasn't enough. Do you feel that there was something else you needed at that early stage where it wasn't so bothersome? Do you feel early intervention? What should they have provided, in your opinion?
I don't think it's I don't think it's what they should have provided, because if I draw a parallel with diabetes, we've known about diabetes for a very long time. Treatments for diabetes have developed. Treatments, even since I was diagnosed with diabetes, treatments have become way more sophisticated and are looking at almost reversal. And I think the difference is with tinnitus, it's still such an unknown quantity. It's still such a subjective area, and there isn't a medical intervention. So therefore, there isn't that same level of support available. You know, when the solution is cognitive behavioral therapy, when the solution is self-reflection, it feels like it's a softer, almost a cop-out treatment, you know, which is completely, I mean, it's absolutely the wrong thing to say, but you know, I think in terms of the way that we see healthcare, you go to your doctor to get some sort of medication that will help you with your condition. And there's still that stigma and that huge barrier about something which is internal, which is the way your brain is working, which is affecting your emotions. And it's almost as though we treat tinnitus on a parallel with mental health. And we're getting much better at treating mental health. Yeah, reading the paper this weekend, loads and loads of articles about ADHD and autism. And it's really good to see that now we're starting to take that seriously. Tinnitus is on that journey, that it's on that pathway, it's on that spectrum of actually there isn't medical help, there is therapeutic help. But for that, you've got to know you've got I don't want to say you've got to be lucky, but you've absolutely got to find somebody who understands what it is that you're struggling with and knows that there's a solution available.
Mm.
And I think the biggest challenge then is, you know, I knew when I was diagnosed with diabetes that if I started taking the medicine and kept taking the medicine would deal with my diabetes. You know, the medicine brought my blood sugars down. What I chose to do then about trying to change my lifestyle was supplementary to the medication. With tinnitus, as with anything with any of those kinds of conditions, when the solution lies within, it's a much harder journey to go on. And if you've got a preconception that talking therapies don't really work, then you're not starting at 0. You're probably starting at about -10 because you've got to overcome your own. I had to overcome my own barriers of whether or not CBT was an option in order to be able to see the value of it and actually apply it. And I still, you know, to be honest, I'm still not sure I'm actually applying it in perhaps the way that it's envisaged as being a solution. But I've found my own way of doing it. And, you know, and I think that's the extra big challenge for people who are suffering with tinnitus is, you've got to find your own way of dealing with it. And I think, I think the other advantage of having gone through this journey with diabetes is that unless you catch it incredibly early, right now there is still no cure for diabetes. So I didn't come into this journey in tinnitus expecting that at any point the tinnitus would stop. You know, I'm not, I recognized I wasn't going to cure it. That actually what I was going to do was find a way of managing it. So the parallels, and it was interesting that it took you know, 3 or 4 sessions talking to you before I finally actually made that connection. Oh, wait a minute, tinnitus is this journey for my tinnitus is going to be a bit like the journey for actually, I'm already on this journey. it's making those links and finding, and I think that's, for me, that's what really works, is finding parallels elsewhere in life that give me relevance for the way that I'm going to deal with my tinnitus. You know, oh, you know, you, I don't know, just parallels. I like riding bikes. Okay. Um, there was a big step change when I stopped just riding a bike and actually bought a pair of shoes that clip into the pedals. And I think the learning process of how to feel comfortable on a bike in a completely different relationship with that bike than you've ever been before, um, was quite challenging because, it didn't always work. I fell off embarrassingly, forgetting to unclip my feet from my pedals. But, you know, for me, that's kind of how I've learned also to to come to terms with my tinnitus, is that it's not going to be a smooth ride. There will be times it's going to be trial and error. Some things will work, some things won't work. Um, and that, I suppose part of that was learning that masking techniques don't overcome tinnitus; they give you relief. Yeah, and so that was a learning process as well, because I think when I first understood about masking, and then I heard about notching and all these wonderful things you can do with sounds in order to help you deal with your tinnitus. Actually, they don't help you deal with your tinnitus. They give you some relief from your tinnitus. And unless you've got those coping strategies attached to those reliefs, the moment you do take off the headphones or the sleep band or whatever you're wearing, if you're not if you're not prepared, what happens is the tinnitus comes back and it feels like it's louder. And so, um, learning that, it's a staged process and there are lots and lots of different things you need to put together, I think has been probably the biggest challenge.
Oh, wow. It's really interesting what you've said there, because what you've ended with there is kind of what you started with about self-reflection, and how it's not a one fit all, process. It's that personalized, I need to find parallels with things in my life. I need to find situations where I've shown resilience, so that I can apply it to this.
Yeah.
Uh, Really interesting. Really
Yeah. And I think that ability to link it to something else, to know that you've done it before, is actually really helpful. And particularly if you're trying something that you've not tried before. Um, and CBT, I knew, I knew about it. I'd not, I'd not tried. I suppose I tried it via an app, and I found that quite difficult because the way that I tend to work better is by talking through, thinking about, and talking through the challenges I face and whether the tools work or not, and how am I going to make this this new idea come to fruition. I need interaction to make that happen. Being told, try this and it'll work, it doesn't quite do it for me.
Right, it's the feedback, isn't it? It's the feedback. Are you doing it correctly?
Yeah.
Maybe adapt it in this way, and that can change things.
Yeah. And I think also talking to you and knowing that you've been through this journey as well, that's where that communication really comes in handy. It's one thing to hear a voice in your ear saying, trust me, it works. Having a conversation with somebody who says, yeah, actually, I've been there. It does work. It's not easy, but it does work, is much, much more helpful. Much more helpful.
That's a really valid point. I mean, what as you're aware, I got tinnitus about 4 years ago now. But I've been working with people with tinnitus a lot longer before that. But I have to admit that my skill set developed dramatically after I had it. It's
Mm.
understandable you've got that personal experience of it and having to go through this process, like you say. But what would you say about people that maybe don't have it, that maybe want to help people with tinnitus, or the doctors, the GPs? Does it mean they can't help people if they don't have that personal experience, or?
Um, good, good healthcare professionals will find a way of helping. I think probably it's more, the onus is more on the tinnitus community, if you will, to help people to understand what tinnitus is actually about. And one of the things I did with family and friends who were interested, um, there's an audio notch, where you can actually, the first thing you do is identify the frequency and the volume of your tinnitus. I did that, and then everybody who said, "I wish I knew what it felt like," I got them to put a pair of headphones on, and I just played them for a minute, the sound that I had constantly in my ears, and I think their perception changed. And, okay, you can't know what it feels like to have tinnitus if you don't have it, but you can begin to understand what the person that you're talking to is going through. And I think trying to produce the noise and saying it's this pitch and it's this volume and it's constant and it's in both ears, or it comes and goes, but when it comes, it's like this. Being able to give the people um, that awareness of what you're actually suffering with, I think is useful, and maybe there's some scope for improving non-sufferers' understanding of what people with tinnitus are actually going through by using apps like that. And as somebody with tinnitus, there are plenty of videos you can watch on YouTube that talks about the different type, the different sounds. Is it crickets? Is it a whistle? Is it a kettle? Is it a hiss? You know, the information's out there, and I think maybe there is an opportunity there for some better education.
De-
Um,
Definitely.
because I think if you are somebody who cares about other people, and I don't think anybody goes into healthcare as a profession unless they actually have an empathy or a compassion for other people. They will. Good healthcare professionals will always sympathise. Will always um, try and make the patient feel better. I think having with tinnitus, because it is something that you can hear, it is possible to kind of give that extra dimension of actually, this is what I'm suffering with right now.
You're so right. In the 3 degrees that I've done in audiology, I've never had a video played to me of what tinnitus actually sounds like. I've had
Mm,
definitions, but I've never had an experience where this is what some people hear.
yeah,
How would
yeah.
you understand if you've not had that?
I try not to convince everybody how much I'm suffering, but I did find that just having the audio in the end, not even with headphones, just upload the audio notch app and just play the sound, and we'd be sitting with friends and they'd say, "Really? You've got this? When you wake up?" No, no, all the time. Right now I can hear this. In fact, ironically, I can't hear what I'm playing you because it's at exactly the pitch that I'm hearing. Therefore, I can't hear that. But the fact that you can hear that tells you what I'm putting up with. It was probably the most powerful educational tool, and I think it changes the perception that other people have of what's actually going on. Certainly changed my relationship with Dina. In that if we were sitting down and I was clearly struggling, she knew what that meant. She knew what was actually going on, rather than me just saying, "Oh, my tinnitus is bad tonight. It was, she could put herself in my position and sort of, and then, as a result, that you don't feel as though you're suffering on your own, because if the person that you're with actually understands a bit better what's going on, they're more likely to um, offer ideas, offer, why don't, go and rest for a while. Why don't you go and listen to your, I've got two favorite sounds. I've got cicadas and ocean waves. Go and listen to those for a bit. And she became, not more supportive because she was already supportive, but she became more empathetic of what I was actually going through.
Absolutely. And you had to involve her in that process,
Mm.
because, like we say, people may say and may think it's helpful saying you just have to live with it. But like you say, it's education, it's okay, maybe helping me
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
process.
And it because it's in your head.
Yes.
For me, there was a tendency to shut everything else out. I think I shut down. We've had conversations where I said that Dina's mum on more than one occasion said he's changed, he's different. And although on reflection, I've probably had my tinnitus for 30 years, it's only in the last 5 or 6 years that things got worse, or that my perception of, as I now know, my perception of it increased. And that came ironically, after a bike accident where I broke my shoulder and broke my cheekbone. And so there was clearly an impact on my head. And after that, I did become much, much more aware of it. Um, and I think what happened was, because it was constant and it was in there, I just stopped communicating with people because my focus was always on my tinnitus. It's that cycle that you get into of all I can hear is my tinnitus, and now it's getting louder because all I can hear is my tinnitus, and now it's getting louder because all I can hear is my tinnitus, and you just go into that terrible downward spiral. And I think conversations with you were the breaking of that cycle. What I began to understand was it doesn't have to be like that. And there was a huge sense, even before I actually started to build a toolkit that helped. There was just knowing that it didn't always have to be like that was probably enough. It actually, it didn't matter if I then didn't take complete control or didn't manage to get completely on top of it. Just knowing that it didn't always have to be like that was a really good, strong starting point. And coming back to what I was saying earlier, that message was very clear in apps, in podcasts, in webinars, in YouTube videos. But that interaction, that talking to somebody who's already been on that journey, um, made it honest, made it real, I think. I I suppose I'm a bit cynical about things in general, and being told, or self-help telling me it doesn't always have to be like this, it's very easy for me to brush that off, to try something once, and if there's not a miracle cure there, it's like I want to pick up a guitar and be Eric Clapton, and I can't do that, so therefore I'm never going to look at the guitar again. I tried that once, it didn't work. Rather than learning that the changing habits is what really, and all over the stuff that I was following on YouTube, the word habituation came up again and again. It's about habituation, habituation, habituation. And yet I only saw exercises as being one-offs. because the cynicism said, well, if it doesn't work first time, it won't work. And I think that interaction and that checking in and that accountability of, have you tried this? Have you done it for the week? Let's talk about this next week. And there's almost, well, I haven't done it. What do I need? I need to do it. I need to do it. And combining that with the discipline of creating and keeping a journal was I think really what started me beginning to understand that this was about changing habits. It wasn't about one-off exercises. So so yeah, I mean, being able to talk to somebody who understands, being able to understand that it's about changing habits, realizing that it's about learning new ways of thinking and not just a series of one-off exercises. That was really important. And I think, going back to the conversation about what do healthcare professionals need to understand better, I think it's if you can get healthcare professionals to understand what tinnitus actually sounds like to the individual. Two, if you can get them then to recognize that it can be handled through changes of habit. It can be, that relationships with tinnitus can be improved based on those changes of habits. And then you start to make things better for people with tinnitus. Assuming that they can't talk to a healthcare professional in the first place and they don't just live with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, even on that case or that front, you mentioned that it's something that you've had for 30 years, and there are going to be habits that are so embedded. There are going to be beliefs that are so embedded. And I can't tell you the amount of times that people say to me, "Oh, I'm a lost cause. I've had this for 20 years, nothing will change." How do you respond to that? Like, how, from your point of view, what's your thoughts on that?
Having switched camps quite recently from I'm always going to have to live with this too. Actually, there's something I can do about it. Um, I I think it's so trite to say there's always hope, but actually, I suppose that's probably the biggest takeaway that I've learned out of this, that sitting there and saying, I've dealt with it for so long now that I just have to put up with it. I think that's born out of a lack of awareness about what options are available, and the give it a go. You have to know what it is that you're going to give a go to in order to be able to realize that actually there might be something I can do about it. And I think, it's very, very easy to get into that. There's nothing I can do about this. We do it for so many different conditions. And research is constantly showing that actually a lot of this is genetic, or it's about behavior of synapses in the brain. There's some re-education we can do here. There is never a lost cause. And um, and I think if people who have that view, I've dealt with it for 30 years, there's nothing I can do about it, it's always going to be like this. If you can just get to them and say, actually, there is something you can do about it. No guarantees that it will work, but there is something you can try, is probably enough of a starting point.
No, I totally agree. Oh, I just wish I could spread that word to everyone.
It's it's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, all the work that I do, I work with healthcare professionals to help them understand how better they can get their messages across. Okay. And it doesn't matter whether we're working with oncologists or whether we're working with diabetologists, endocrinologists. The challenge is always, you know, how do we spread this information? How do we make people more aware. And it's ironic, isn't it, that in an age where everything is supposedly available at your fingertips and available instantly through social media, through the internet, that it's still so difficult to get messages, messages of hope. I don't know, messages that, actually, come on, let's give it a go. You never know. Why is it so difficult to get those messages out there? And without wishing to go into too deep of reflection, we do spend an awful lot of time focusing on what's wrong rather than what we can do about it. As I think as a species, we've fallen down that hole of catastrophizing and um, and just finding ways of getting positive messages out, sincere positive messages. There's plenty of false positivity around. Sincere positive messages is the challenge. How you do that, I don't know.
We've all just got to do our bit, don't we? If we can all do
Mm,
our bit, and then the next person does their bit, that's
yeah, yeah, and there is that kind of slow burn of talk to somebody who's got tinnitus, tell them that actually you wouldn't have believed it, but you know 2 years ago, I started doing this, and it's completely transformed my life. And I've had a couple of those conversations with people since, just in the last few weeks. And I I think there's this theory that we only know about 25% of those people who've been diagnosed with diabetes. Okay, because until you go to your GP and have a blood test and actually get your HbA1c measured, nobody knows whether you've got diabetes or not. So and the people who have probably got it are people who wouldn't tend to go and see their healthcare professional. Nobody knows how many people actually suffer from tinnitus. My sister went to a yoga class and started talking about the fact that I'd been having sessions with you. 5 other people in her yoga class said, "Oh, I suffer from that really badly." And 5 out of 10 people, all older, all suffering from tinnitus and believing that there's not much they can do about it. It's about starting those conversations and getting people to understand what's available.
no, absolutely right. And we have organizations that are, trying to spread that awareness. We have Tinnitus Awareness Week once a year, to try and spread that. But I guess it's that first interaction if somebody does come to a healthcare professional, and it's usually that GP.
Yeah.
The language, those I call them hopiums, that little that that little bit of hope you give them,
Yeah.
it makes such a difference.
And I think that's the challenge, is getting the word out to GPs that there is something that can be done. It doesn't have to be that the GP has got the solution. They just need to know where they can direct people. What apps can they offer them? What videos can they go and look at? Who can they go and talk to? Is this about referring on to an audiologist? Is this actually about knowing where there's I don't know, a tinnitus support group? Are there tinnitus support groups? I stumbled across an awful lot of information about tinnitus, having convinced myself, I think that was the thing, having convinced myself that it was actually tinnitus that I'd got and not just a noise. And it wasn't that it was normal. And it wasn't because I went to a concert and then a few days later it was better. It was, I had to become consciously aware of the fact that there was an issue. Now, with diabetes, it's different. You go and have as I said earlier, you go and have your blood test, and your GP will say, "You've got diabetes. This is how we're going to deal with it." With tinnitus, you've got to work out for yourself that you've got tinnitus in the first place to be able to go and have a conversation. And I would have felt a bit silly going into a GP and saying, "I've got this whistling in my ears. What can I do about it?" And I'm not sure how I ended up at the GPs. And I think I'd gone about a completely different problem and happened to mention the fact that I'd got this strange sound in my ears, and the GP at that point referred me to the audiologist. And then I just let the trail go cold. I didn't chase it. Um, so improving GP, but then, GPs now need to be more aware about autism, ADHD, diabetes, obesity. There are so many areas now that we're asking GPs to become more specialist in order simply to give their patients access to the kind of support that they need. It's, maybe the answer doesn't all lie with GPs, but because they are generally the first point of contact, it's such a difficult one.
It is a difficult one because I guess they can only do so much, refer you on and, hope that you follow that on. But if it's not a huge issue, then what
Yeah,
happens then? You know, what actually happens at that point? Are they checking, how's your tinnitus when you go back? But then they're time bound,
yeah,
they're time bound. Maybe there's a more pressing issue that they
yeah.
have to. It is a difficult
It's
one.
this sliding scale, isn't there? I mean, if you've got high blood pressure and tinnitus, which one are they going
Right.
to treat? Um, yeah, it is a real dilemma, and then it comes down to the individual having to go off and look for. Now, if you recognize the fact that you've got tinnitus 20 years ago, and you've become reconciled to the fact that you've got tinnitus, you 20 years ago 20 years ago, there wasn't, okay, we had the internet 20 years ago, but it wasn't quite as sophisticated as it is now. There certainly weren't apps you could download onto your phone. There certainly wasn't the awareness of CBT. If your knowledge and acceptance of tinnitus is sat in 20 or 30 years ago, then you need to have that nudge that there's actually something you can do about it. You're never going to go and talk to your GP about it. So how then do you have that outreach? It's almost like there needs to be a huge, beyond Tinnitus Awareness Week, there needs to be a huge outreach campaign. Have you got tinnitus? Here are some ideas for you. And, maybe there's an argument for social media campaigns, but, somebody's got to be sponsoring that.
Absolutely.
The diabetes charities are generally quite well funded. I suspect tinnitus support organizations have nowhere near access to the same kinds of money to be able to put campaigns together and create support networks. It's very much about, it comes back to that thing about it being in your head. It's almost like it's an individual's problem rather than
You're right.
and that, the other thing about support groups is that I think those support groups need guidance as well. Otherwise, there's a risk that you end up with, my tinnitus is worse than your tinnitus, and oh, mine's a whistle, what's yours? It's a kettle. And what you don't get is constructive input. There's a knowing you're not alone is important. Knowing you can do something about it is also important. And I think support groups, if they're not facilitated in some way, can do the you're not alone bit, but they can't necessarily guide people with what's available for them.
You're right. And we've seen that so many times where people have gone on there and they actually end up feeling worse.
Mm,
We've got to be really careful about advising somebody to go to a support group, whether it's online or face to face. What stage is that person in?
yeah, and there is also, I became aware of the fact that I wanted to do something about it, but that focus on wanting to do something about it and going off and exploring what's available to help you understand your tinnitus and pitch your tinnitus and mask your tinnitus means all you're thinking about is your tinnitus. So, there's a risk that actually increases the spiral rather than giving you opt-outs. And I think it was Treble Health in the States and Otto in the UK that really started me on that journey of, it's not just about sound, it's actually about behavior as well. that then led to that. "Oh, I've tried that, it didn't work. Let me work my way through the app. Yeah, I've done all of those exercises. Now what?" Because what I didn't want to hear is come back and do it again. And I mean, again, that's a challenge on an intellectual level. If you have activities for day one, day two, day three, day four, okay, you've done week one, now on to, here's a 6-week program. There is a risk that people complete the 6-week program and think that everything should be fine now, rather than understanding that and finding a way of combining it's a 6-week program and you've got to keep coming back, and you've got to you learn to use these tools as and when these tools are required. I think that's another big challenge.
No, you're right. I don't, as a society, we're not the most patient, aren't we? If we know that something is 6 weeks, we think, right, okay, 6 weeks, I should be better. If I'm not, something is wrong with me. Week
Yeah.
spiraling more and
Yeah, I mean, for those people who are on the internet, when the 5-second advert at the beginning of a YouTube video is intolerable, 6 weeks is an awful long time to wait for your tinnitus to go away. Oh, look, it hasn't gone away. What a waste of 6 weeks. That's 6 weeks I'm never going to get back. Rather than thinking, actually, at that point on day 3, when I was doing that exercise, all of a sudden I wasn't aware of my tinnitus anymore. Maybe I should go back and do that more regularly, because it only took 3 minutes. But in those 3 minutes, I completely changed the way I was thinking about things. That's what the human interaction in it. That was your real value in my journey, was that, building the toolkit, but also understanding that and maybe I was just being stupid beforehand and just being um, impatient, but learning that do it every day. Just one thing this week, do it every day. In fact, don't do it every day. Do it 3 or 4 times every day. My Post-it notes are still all over the flat for my breathing exercises. Do I consciously do deep breathing exercises now every time I look at the Post-it note? No. But looking at the Post-it note makes me think, you've got this, which is, comes all the way back to the very first lesson. Come up with something that you can say to yourself that means that you feel as though you're starting to take control. Something simple, something meaningful. And that's exactly what that triggers now. I look at the Post-it note and I think, yeah, you've got this. And it's quite incredible how, as a cynic, how those behaviors did change, and change quite quickly. And I wouldn't say that I'm open. I spend half my life trying to teach people about the value of change and behavior change. I wouldn't say that I practice what I preach a lot of the time. And I'm constantly surprised by the ease with which those behaviors did change and the transformation that it made in my life and my relationship with my tinnitus.
incredible. I remember, and I think this is a valid point as well, that you said that at the very beginning. You were very open about the type of personality that you had, and that you were a cynic. You weren't sure if this was going to be beneficial, but hey, let's give it a go. You are open. And I always say, that's all I need. I just need a slightly open door. The fact that you've come on to the Zoom, that's all I need.
And what I think the one thing I would want to change, perhaps it was what was necessary for me, but it shouldn't have to be that way for other people, is the first contact was out of absolute desperation. I would, I can't hand on heart say that I was suicidal, but I didn't know how to cope. And it was absolutely clear that I was going through bouts of depression purely because I couldn't cope with the tinnitus. And so the desperation drove me to become that, to give you that slightly open door that you could push on. I would have preferred to have come before I got to that desperation stage. And I would like to think that I would have been more open, or would have been open even if I wasn't desperate, but I'm not actually sure I would have been. So maybe, maybe the desperation was needed in my case.
Yeah, it's really difficult because, like you said earlier, that some people are worried that if they reach out for help, it's going to bring their attention to it more. And it's, but I'm coping semi okay at the moment. Why would I want to draw more attention to this? But is it denial?
Yeah, yeah. And I think I can remember years ago reading something about medical approaches to pain. Pain is what the patient says it is. So if I think I'm coping and then it gets a little bit worse, but I'm still coping, and then it gets a little bit worse, but I'm still coping, we tend to push those coping, and pain is whatever the patient says it is great because it means that if, I mean, kids, when they fall over, one child will have a screaming fit. Another child will brush the dirt off the cut that they've now got on their knee and get on with it. So pain is a very personal thing. And I think, do you want to make a fuss because your tinnitus feels a bit loud? Is it just me? It's that internal reflection of, am I just not coping? Should I be bigger than this? And so that, I think also hinders our willingness to ask for help. Aside from the fact that just asking for help in the first place can be seen as a sign of weakness. There's so many psychological barriers to overcome.
Absolutely. And I do feel as I mean, you didn't go through this path necessarily, but very often people do get referred to ENT and they will go because they want medical clearance. They want to, and I know, you did see an ENT, but they'll go for medical clearance. But at that point, we need to be better at saying, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what I strongly recommend that you have done,
Mm,
rather than always just saying, come back to me if it gets worse. We don't need to wait till it gets worse. We just need to plant that seed. And at least the patient knows that there is something that can be done when I feel ready to do it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think I think for me it was slightly seasonal in that, when all the doors and windows are open and the outside world is coming in, my tinnitus didn't feel so bad. Come the winter, when everything is closed in, it felt louder, and it was through So I tried the Otto app through the summer and did all the little exercises over a 6-week period, and actually it did feel as though it got a bit better. The challenge was when I was cocooned again, um, and things did feel as though they got worse. And I think it was that spiral, that downward spiral of going from, actually, I've got strategies here. And I think what I hadn't appreciated was what I was doing were actually strategies. A lot of what you gave me was um, that uh, that confidence that actually what I was doing wasn't wrong. And I think that moment where I said um, something about, so my two most successful masking sounds are cicadas, and we were having that conversation about I find it difficult to do um, exercises where you have to close your eyes and imagine that you're somewhere else. Well, so why do what sounds do you use? I use cicadas and I use the sea. Okay, where did how did you get the? Oh, I recorded the cicadas by standing in the garden with my phone against, up by a tree, and then my son turned it into a 2-hour tape. And I went to the sea, and and then suddenly I realized that actually I've got that capability of putting myself where I needed to be. I've done that by actually recording the sounds I wanted to keep. And using those sounds initially to create that environment, and then being able to create that environment without the sounds, and there were those moments where I think you opened up for me a a far greater understanding of what those exercises were about, that the app on its own could never do. And what's the word I'm looking for? You gave me a sense of the fact that what I was doing was okay. And, yes, the new behavior changes, the new habits that you introduced absolutely created the basis within which I could then y- start to change my relationship with my tinnitus. But you also helped me to understand that, you know, there were a lot of things I was doing that just needed to be pushed that a little bit further.
Absolutely. And I guess it's that confidence knowing that actually what I am doing is right. What I am doing is okay, and
And there's a reason why I've done this. There's a yes, okay. So if you want to go into the science of it, the frequency and the pitch of those cicadas in the trees, and I'm very lucky. I live in a place where I can go and record cicadas in the trees. But you know, the scientific fact that that sound was therapeutic was great. What you did was help me understand how it wasn't the sound necessarily. What mattered was putting myself in the position where I could hear that sound.
yes,
And and that completely changed the way that I viewed myself, and the way that I um, interact with some of these. The cynicism was kind of actually what you did was you legitimized the sound, and that then pushed the cynicism away. You gave me validation. And going back to, if you've suffered from tinnitus for 30 years and you don't think there's anything you can do about it, there will be an element of cynicism that anything can change that. And I think it's the challenge then for a healthcare professional is finding where that door is slightly open, and pushing on the right door. And for some people that will actually be a start of, well, you can use masking sounds. Yeah, yeah, I do that already. Oh, okay. Good. What masking sounds do you use, and why do you use those? And that skill of being able to ask those questions um is that's huge. And I think um get it if you can get access to those people, and have that, okay, which door can we push on? Which window is slightly open? Where can we go with this? I think that's a real asset.
I've been thinking the same thing. Thinking the same thing. And do you know what? I've not discussed it with the people that I want to discuss it with. The people that are similar in the way that they work with people with tinnitus. Um, I do think we have a responsibility, just as healthcare professionals, to be able to find the people who do have that innate skill and get them trained up for sure.
Yeah.
Um, in other areas, because we need more people. Um, globally, especially in the States. So I would say most of my clients are in the States, actually,
Wow.
believe it or not, a lot of them. Couple in Australia, Mexico, but mainly in the States, and of course the UK. But what I find is that the audiologists, the tinnitus specialists, tend to only prescribe hearing aids. That's their first point of call. And I'd really love for you to maybe just mention about your experience on that path, because it was something you tried. You know,
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Yeah. Right. So, um, and this was all driven off the back of the research that I had done for myself. Hmm. And I went down a very scientific route because I couldn't when I was listening to podcasts and webinars and even YouTube videos talking about tinnitus, there wasn't very much talk about habituation at the time that I was looking. And possibly, excuse me, possibly if they had all focused on habituation, I wouldn't have paid much attention anyway, because what I could hear was a noise. It was a sound. So clearly the solution must be in overcoming that sound. So um, I tried, there's a guy in the UK, can't remember his name now, but um, he produces masking noises, and he suffers quite badly from tinnitus, and his noises are therapeutic for him. So I started with those noises. Yeah, they worked, but not always. Um, so then I found Audio Notch, and then Audio Notch, for people who don't understand, it enables you to work out what pitch your tinnitus is, and it then takes sounds like waves or waterfalls, but what it does is removes the pitch of your tinnitus, so that when you listen to the sounds, your tinnitus fills the gap. And the idea is it gives you intense relief, and it really does. It does work. And if you subscribe, you can also upload your music and have your music notched. So I'm starting to understand now what frequency my tinnitus is at. The fact that if you notch sound, you can get rid of the sound. So the next thing is I look at, I find Treble Health, and at the time Treble Health was saying, yeah, this is, what we can offer is these devices that you can wear that will allow you to play this masking sound in the background all of the time, and it will help you deal with your tinnitus. So I became convinced that these masking devices were what I needed. What I hadn't appreciated at the time was these masking devices are actually hearing aids, because that's not how they are portrayed when you watch the videos. So I live in Italy. I went to see an audiologist here. Um, so I went to Amplifon to ask them to give me a pair of these hearing aids, and they said, they're very expensive. You really need to make sure that you need them before we sell them to you, because we can't hand on heart sell you something that's going to be very expensive that doesn't do the trick. And no, give them to me, give them to me. So I saw an audiologist. At the same time, I found Otto, and I had an initial conversation with somebody from Otto who said, "Oh yeah, what you've done is you've gone down the scientific approach here. We don't do that. We're much more focused on behavior change and habituation." Yeah, whatever. Give me a pair of hearing aids. But I downloaded the app. I tried the app, and yes, some of those exercises did seem to work, but I had the problem that we were talking about earlier of, I've done it once, surely this 6-week program will work. In desperation at the end of that, I asked for your contact details, and we had that conversation, and I came and saw you, and you did an a hearing test, and you gave me some hearing aids to try out. And the first time I put them on, my life was transformed. And yes, you can listen to masking sounds. And I started listening to those masking sounds, and it seemed great. The hearing aids seem to amplify everything a bit. They seem to make my hearing sharper. And whenever I wanted to, I could press a button and here would come the ocean waves. And after about 2 weeks, I'm wearing them at the same time as we're having weekly conversations, and I'm learning all of these new behaviors and these new habits, and using these different techniques to retrain my brain. What I started to notice was actually the hearing aids were quite invasive. If I didn't like where they were compared to how my glasses sat. I didn't like the fact that sometimes it felt as though I could hear them rubbing against the short hairs behind my ears. sometimes my ears itched and I couldn't scratch them because there were these things inside them. And after about, and then I had to go away for work, and I didn't want to risk damaging the hearing aids because you had given them to me on trial. And so I decided not to take them with me, but to use the techniques and just use natural sounds to try and mask my tinnitus. And I found that 2 days of working, actually, I didn't pay any attention to my tinnitus whatsoever. And it wasn't the hearing aids that were ever going to fix the problem. And I decided at that point, thank you very much. I'll give them back now. The trial is over. So I went from being absolutely convinced that I needed them because the masking of the tinnitus was what was going to save me, to realizing that they're a great device, but actually a pair of over-ear headphones, a pair of bone conduction headphones, or even you know, and that was the other thing I learned as well. I tried to steer away from in-ear headphones because I believed that they made my tinnitus worse, but of course they don't actually make my tinnitus worse if what I've got is a coping strategy for when I choose to take the buds out. So what I learned was it is absolutely about the way you think and interact with the tinnitus, and not about the way you choose to mask it.
That
It's so much down to believing that there's something you can do about it.
it's incredible how well, I'm not surprised that you're here, and I think I've said this a number of times. I'm not surprised because you did put the work in, and hopefully I'm not as scary, but, I will ask you if you've done the work.
Yeah,
Everyone's
quite
like,
right
"Oh
too.
god, Gladys is going to tell me off if I don't do it. I better just do it and see."
But but that that sense of accountability will again, it will work for some people and it won't work for others. And I know full well that if I've got something that I need to do, it plays on my mind if I haven't done it. So there's an element of guilt to start with, but it doesn't take long to work out that those post-it notes on the fridge and on the wall above my desk actually help me to think about things differently. Doesn't take long to buy into the fact that it's not for, you're not doing it for my good. You're not doing it for my benefit. Or rather, I'm not doing it for your benefit. I'm doing it because it's actually working for me.
Absolutely.
There has to be an element of openness to change on the part of the sufferer. And, I think there's always the risk as well that we carry some of these things as a badge. So I think in the early stages, no, in the later stages, I think probably there was an element of suffering from tinnitus and making everybody know that I was suffering from tinnitus was marked me out as being a bit, a bit different. And I think I'd gone far enough down that rabbit hole of actually starting to almost wallow in it. And I think probably breaking that cycle was the biggest aid to finding coping strategies. Once I knew I didn't want it to be something that made me different anymore, yeah, I was quite easily sold.
No, and I guess we spoke about that a little bit towards the end as well, didn't we? Zooming out, not talking about it as much, decide
Yeah, that week of, right, whatever you do, don't talk about it, was probably the most life-changing of all of the weeks of exercise. The from giving your tinnitus a name and making it your friend, to don't even acknowledge its existence, was probably the most stimulating week. And having somebody with you who, you know, was prepared to say, we can't talk about it. And Dina was absolutely brilliant in doing that as well. You know, she absolutely supported me on that.
Incredible.
So, you know, each of those different exercises that I went through, the build of it, very clever, very, very clever. Um, and very easy to do as well. You know, because it was built in a very um very structured, very thought through. You know, I reflect on it now as a trainer and facilitator. You know, it was very, very cleverly done. And they were easy exercises to complete. You know, and I think part of the challenge probably with you get to the end of the 6 weeks of Otto and you've got such a toolkit that actually working out which are the right ones for you becomes overwhelming. You know, I'll just start at week 1 again, and actually starting at week 1 again doesn't do it. Building it, you know, what? Okay, all we're going to do this week is this. All we're going to do this week is this. All we're going to do this week is this. You know, oh look, 6 weeks later, here are 6 different things you can do to help you deal with your tinnitus. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ma-
Thank you. I really appreciate that feedback as well. You know, but you've been absolutely brilliant. I'm not surprised that you're here because I knew you'd get here. Knew you would. I knew you would. I just needed you on the call. That was it. And you did the work. And I'm so grateful that you're happy for me to, share some of this
yeah.
with other people. I know people that will find this incredibly helpful. So I really
I'm happy to be involved in whatever way I can. So, you know, if you want, you know, if you I don't know, if you're doing any training at any point and you could use a patient at the other end, just give me a shout.
that's incredible. And that says a lot coming from, some people will get to a stage where they're managing their tinnitus better and they'll say to me, I do never want to speak about it again. I don't want to speak about it again.
So the fact that I have been able to use the tools and techniques that you've given me, and it has changed my relationship with something that was starting to put me in a very, very dark place. I'm more than happy to share those experiences. You know, if you're doing I don't know, a training day and you want me to come along and chat for an hour, just say, okay, just ask.
Appreciate that. I really
I'm
do.
not, and this isn't a kind of. I'd like to thank you for what you know. Genuinely, if there's anything I can do, any help I can give you in spreading the word, just shout.
Really appreciate that. I really, really do. And it took you up on your offer today, and I really appreciate your time for it. And I do think it will make a difference. I really do. And I can't thank you enough.
My pleasure.